Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Monday mornings usually followed a familiar script for Larry. Rising early, he would prepare a strong cup of coffee and settle by the window of his modest apartment, observing the city as it woke. The first rays of sunlight crept over the skyline, and the world seemed to stir alongside him, its momentum growing as the urban hum intensified. But this Monday defied expectation. As Larry savored his coffee, he noticed his wife, Lucy, lingering by the door. Her coat hung loosely over her arm, and she fiddled with her sleeve, her gaze firmly avoiding his. "Larry, we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alarmed, Larry placed his mug down, the words immediately setting him on edge. "All right," he said, striving to mask his unease. "What's going on?" Deep down, Larry sensed this wasn't just a routine conversation. It carried an air of finality, a shift he wasn't ready for. Lucy hesitated before speaking again. I think it's time we end this," she said, her words hanging heavy in the air like a storm cloud. Larry froze, his mind struggling to process her declaration. "What?" he managed to say, his voice cracking. Lucy drew a deep breath, as if summoning the strength to continue. "I've been seeing someone else," she admitted, her words trembling. "I'm in love with him, Larry. I want a divorce." For a moment, Larry remained motionless, his expression inscrutable, though his hands trembled subtly. Slowly, he folded the newspaper he had been reading and placed it aside. "So that's it? Just like that?" he asked, his voice tight but calm. "You're ready to walk away from everything we've built?" Tears filled Lucy's eyes, but she forced herself to respond. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said, her voice breaking. "But I don't feel anything for you anymore. It's like I've been living with a stranger." Though his chest ached, Larry suppressed his emotions, a skill he had mastered over the years. "So, this man you've found," he said, his voice sharp. "He makes you feel alive again, doesn't he?" The bitterness in his tone was unmistakable. Lucy nodded silently, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I'm sorry, Larry. I never meant to hurt you." Larry stood abruptly, pacing as though movement might bring clarity. "Sorry doesn't change anything," he said, his voice taut with controlled anger. "I knew something was off, but I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to believe that the woman I married would do this to me." Lucy began to cry softly, but Larry's voice hardened further. "You don't need to explain yourself. You've made your decision and there's no going back." His composure startled Lucy, who had anticipated an explosion of anger, not the chilling detachment he displayed. "How long have you known?" Larry asked abruptly, his piercing gaze locking onto her. "How long have I been watching you destroy this?" Lucy's face went pale, her voice trembling. You knew?" she asked in disbelief. Larry nodded. "Of course I knew," he replied. "I saw the signs before you even realized you were leaving me. The hidden phone, the late nights, the excuses. They made it obvious. But I wanted to see how far you'd go." Her hands shook as she tried to respond, but Larry cut her off. "Save it. You made your choices, Lucy. Don't pretend this wasn't deliberate." His words were like knives, slicing through her defenses. "You want a divorce? Fine. But don't think you're walking away with everything we've worked for. The house, the savings, it's all mine now." The silence that followed was suffocating, and Lucy slumped into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. "Larry, please," she whispered, but her plea fell on deaf ears. His mind was already elsewhere, planning his next moves with methodical precision. Larry had anticipated this confrontation for months. The subtle signs of her betrayal had been impossible to ignore. Secretive phone calls, unexplained absences, and a growing emotional distance. One evening, seeing her leave their apartment dressed in a way that felt foreign, he knew the truth. Instead of confronting her immediately, he had chosen strategy over impulsiveness. He hired a private investigator who confirmed his suspicions with damning evidence, photos, messages, and receipts that painted a clear picture of her affair with a man named Joshua. Armed with proof, Larry decided to wait for Lucy to come to him. He wanted control over the moment and how it played out. "Why didn't you say anything?" Lucy asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "Why wait?" "Because I didn't need to," Larry said coldly. "You were already unraveling everything. I just let you dig your own grave." Tears streamed down Lucy's face as she stood in front of Larry, but his expression remained as cold and unyielding as stone. "Don't even try crying now, Lucy," he said, his voice void of any sympathy. "It's far too late for that." Hastily, she wiped her cheeks, her eyes pleading silently for a shred of understanding. "I never wanted things to end this way," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought we had lost something. The connection we had, it was gone. Joshua, he made me feel alive again." Larry's jaw clenched, and a harsh, bitter laugh escaped him. "The connection? That's your excuse?" His voice grew sharper as he took a step toward her. "Instead of coming to me, you decided to betray me. And now you're asking for sympathy?" Lucy opened her mouth to respond, but the words failed her. Every excuse she had prepared fell apart under the weight of his relentless gaze. He saw through every lie she had told, leaving her defenseless. Without another word, Larry turned his back on her, his movements rigid and resolute. Larry left the apartment without hesitation, leaving Lucy alone with the crushing weight of her guilt. His next moves were precise and methodical. At the bank, he closed their joint accounts, transferring every cent into a new account under his sole name. Their shared credit cards were canceled immediately. Bit by bit, he dismantled the life they had built together. Returning home, Larry wasted no time. He called his lawyer, Mark, instructing him to begin preparing the divorce papers. His tone was firm, his resolve unshakable. Larry intended to ensure that Lucy bore the full consequences of her choices, emotionally, financially, and professionally. The evidence he had gathered over time would leave no room for doubt. The next day, Lucy arrived at the apartment to find herself locked out. A note taped to the door read, "Your belongings are in the garage. Your keys will no longer work. For further steps, contact Mark." Her chest tightened as she pounded on the door. "Larry!" she called, panic and desperation rising in her voice. "What is this? You can't do this to me!" The door opened slightly, revealing Larry's calm but icy demeanor. His tone was as cold as his expression. "Actually, I can. This is my home now. You are no longer welcome here." Lucy stared at him, her mouth agape. Her voice quivered as she finally spoke. "You're cruel, Larry. Heartless. Heartless." His voice dripped with venom. "The only cruelty here is your betrayal. You made your choices, Lucy. Now you'll face the consequences." Meanwhile, Joshua faced his own unraveling. Larry had anonymously sent a package to Joshua's workplace, containing undeniable evidence of their affair. The fallout was swift and brutal. Summoned to a meeting with HR, Joshua found himself suspended, pending a formal investigation into his conduct. Lucy's downfall was equally relentless. The web of lies she had spun began to collapse, and those around her quickly distanced themselves. Friends, colleagues, and even family withdrew, unable to reconcile with the truth. Her parents, once her strongest supporters, could no longer defend her actions. One evening, Lucy's mother called, her voice heavy with disappointment. "How could you do this to Larry?" she demanded. "He stood by you through everything." Lucy tried to explain, but her words sounded hollow even to her. There was no excuse that could undo the damage she had caused. Her life was unraveling piece by piece, and the weight of her decisions crushed her. As for Larry, he found solace in the growing presence of Claire, a colleague who had quietly supported him throughout his ordeal. Their bond deepened over time, and Larry began to open up to her in ways he hadn't allowed himself to in years. "You're truly amazing, Claire," he said one evening, a rare warmth in his voice. Claire's smile was soft and sincere. "And you're stronger than you realize," she replied. Yet, even with this new connection, Larry knew his battle wasn't over. The divorce proceedings loomed ahead, and he couldn't shake the suspicion that Lucy wasn't finished stirring up trouble. Determined to stay ahead, Larry remained vigilant. The legal process unfolded with precision. Larry's preparation was meticulous. Every piece of evidence he had gathered painted a clear picture of Lucy's betrayal. The affair wasn't just personal, it had ethical and professional repercussions, and Larry ensured these were brought to light. Outside the courtroom, Larry continued to unravel Lucy's facade. He shared enough of the truth with mutual friends and family to make his case indisputable. The fallout was inevitable. Friends who had once supported Lucy now turned away, and her family struggled to reconcile their love for her with her actions. "I never thought you were capable of this," her mother told her during a particularly painful conversation. "You've let us all down." Larry's most decisive move came in the professional arena. Using the same evidence he had sent to Joshua's company, Larry composed a detailed, anonymous report for Lucy's employer. The facts spoke for themselves. The consequences were swift and irreversible. Summoned to HR, Lucy was presented with irrefutable evidence of her misconduct. Her attempts to deny the claims were futile. Within days, she was terminated for violating the company's code of conduct. Her career lay in ruins. As she left the office for the last time, her world crumbling around her, Lucy fully understood the depth of Larry's retribution. Larry, meanwhile, felt no triumph in his actions, only a sense of closure. He had taken back control of his life and ensured that Lucy faced the consequences of her betrayal. Though his heart still bore the scars of her actions, Larry was ready to move forward, leaving the pain of the past behind him. He hadn't just unraveled her marriage. He had guaranteed that her name would forever be tarnished. The disgrace was insufferable, yet Larry wasn't done. Lucy's infidelity had shattered their relationship, but in doing so, she had unwittingly triggered the unraveling of everything she held dear. Larry was resolute in ensuring she faced the full weight of her choices. If she thought the emotional toll was sufficient retribution, she was gravely mistaken. On the day their divorce was finalized, Larry carried out his ultimate move. He had already claimed sole ownership of their house and all their shared assets, but this last gesture was designed to settle the score. As Lucy sat in her lawyer's office, awaiting the final signatures, Larry arrived unannounced, a small parcel in his hands. He placed it deliberately on the desk before her. Lucy's eyes narrowed in confusion as she glanced at the package. "What is this?" she asked, her voice laced with a mixture of apprehension and disbelief. Larry didn't answer immediately. He fixed her with a steady gaze before finally speaking. "Open it," he instructed, his tone calm but heavy with intent. Lucy hesitated, her fingers trembling as she untied the cord securing the package. Inside, she found a thick folder filled with incriminating evidence Larry had painstakingly gathered over time. Photographs, text messages, and even videos provided undeniable proof of her affair with Joshua. But there was more. Nestled within the folder was an envelope bearing her name in bold, angry handwriting. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. It read, "Lucy, this is the path you chose. Let it be a reminder of what you've done. You destroyed everything, and now you'll face the consequences. You can't run from this. Not from me, and not from the truth." Lucy's hands shook as she read the words. Her face drained of color, and the enormity of Larry's actions began to sink in. The man she had once shared a life with, the man who had loved her, had made it his mission to ensure she would never escape accountability for her betrayal. Worse still, he had made certain that the world around her would know the truth. Later that same day, Larry set his final plan into motion. He reached out to the media outlet where Lucy had once dreamed of making her mark as a journalist. With her scandalous affair still raw, Larry used his connections to leak the story. Within hours, Lucy's name and face were plastered across headlines. There was nowhere for her to hide. The fallout was swift and catastrophic. Lucy's already fragile reputation was obliterated. The public, once captivated by her wit and charm, now regarded her with scorn. Friends who felt betrayed by her actions severed ties. Joshua, the man for whom she had risked everything, had long since disappeared, leaving her to face the consequences alone. Her life was in shambles, and the damage was beyond repair. For Larry, her downfall brought no satisfaction. Revenge had not been his goal. His actions weren't about finding joy in her suffering, but about reclaiming what she had taken from him, his self-respect, and his future. Their marriage was over, but he had finally freed himself from the wreckage. In the weeks following the divorce, Larry began to rebuild his life. Without Lucy's shadow looming over him, he found a sense of calm returning. Claire, a colleague who had been a source of support during the chaos, became a steady presence in his life. Their friendship grew stronger, evolving into a relationship. Claire had stood by him at his lowest, and together they began to craft a new chapter. One evening, as they relaxed on the porch of Larry's newly purchased home, watching the sun set, Claire broke the silence. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with curiosity. Larry considered the question, his gaze lingering on the horizon. "Not anymore," he replied, his tone steady and assured. "She's a part of my past that's already closed." Claire smiled and gently took his hand in hers. Together they watched the last rays of sunlight disappear, marking the end of one story and the beginning of another. Years passed, and life continued to move forward. Larry and Claire built a life free from the shadow of Lucy's betrayal. Meanwhile, Lucy struggled to piece her life back together. Every attempt to revive her career faltered, her reputation irrevocably damaged. Larry's triumph lay not in her misery, but in his own renewal. He had risen above the turmoil and reclaimed his dignity, his peace, and ultimately, his future. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.